many characters should you write about? Some responses just became descriptions about all the characters. The focus should be better on one or two characters. Yeah, and I've always said, choose the most difficult question. That one tends to have Priestley in it, or two characters. Don't just write about loads of them. How do you choose the best question? Well, I think I've just told you the most difficult one. The one that asks you to write about Priestley's ideas. I'll skip these because you've seen some examples. How do you get an A or an A star? There's the marking criteria. Again, I'm going to translate that so that you can see it in pupil speak. Have more than one interpretation. We've talked about that. Write about Priestley. So hang on. Half of what you need is already in the B grade. Yeah, those things are in the B. So a lot of you should be thinking there, well, hang on, I could do the stuff that was in the B. Maybe I can do the stuff that's in the A. Have more than one interpretation. Well, we've talked about that all the way through. If you go back to those screens where you look at those particular characters, you can actually get an A. Yeah, most of you here could actually get an A on this paper. That's worth thinking about. So, I've called it all. I wonder if you've spotted why. Let's go back. It's a mnemonic to help you remember. You've got to analyse, you've got to have a writer, you've got to talk about Priestley, you've got to explore. That will get you the A. Can I draw you to the second paragraph? An easy way to get the A is to talk about dramatic irony. With dramatic irony, you force the examiner to give you an A. Yeah, you force them to. So Berling comments on his children at the end of the play, the famous younger generation who know it all. Priestley might be showing us that Berling has learned nothing, which is why the telephone immediately rings to announce a girl has just died. However, further dramatic irony may suggest that Berling is right. Perhaps Priestley is suggesting that, although Sheila and Eric know it all, the lesson they have learned is superficial. Therefore, because the younger generation has not learned the inspector's lesson, a girl has just died. I want to show you something visually here. Notice some of you getting a bit restless. I'll just grab a couple of books. Okay, here is an A-star idea, which I hope you will all be able to see. So this is 1912. 1912 is when the play is set. This is 1914. This is the beginning of the Second World War. The World War that Berling says will never happen. Then we have a big gap. And we have 1939, the beginning of the Second World War. Then we have 1945, the end of the Second World War, and the dropping of the atomic bomb. Well, what has that got to do with the play? Well, I'll tell you. The play is performed and written in 1945. Yeah, at the end of a war in which millions of people have died, and mankind has just dropped a massive new bomb that wipes hundreds of thousands of people out in one go. And that's what Priestley's writing about. Why does he set it all the way back in 1912? Well, this is why. He can see that the Second World War was caused by the people of 1912. The Berlings and the Crofts, the ruling classes who thought they could do anything. They then caused the First World War, and it was called the War to End All Wars. You know, when we got to the end of the First World War, everybody said, we can never have another war. Too many people would die. We could never do this again. What's that got to do with the Berlings? Well, that's like how they treated Eva. And if they'd learnt their lesson, the new girl would not have died. There wouldn't have been a second phone call. And what Priestley is saying, if the ruling classes had learnt their lesson at the end of the First World War, we would never have had the Second. But we did. And so this is the question for us. Sheila and Eric, they're the future here, back in 1914. So what happens to them? What happens to Sheila and Eric that stops them learning the lesson the inspector taught them and still gives us the Second World War? Was it they never learnt the inspector's lesson? They did then, but then forgot it? Or did they learn the lesson, but Mrs. Burling and Mr. Burling and the Crofts and all the other ruling classes, maybe they just didn't give up their power? Maybe they didn't let Sheila and Eric give us a better world. Now that possibility is a hopeful one. And what interestingly happens in 1945 is there's an election and the whole country votes for a socialist government. The whole country agrees with Priestley. We've learnt our lesson, they say. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Priestley's writing at a time about 1912, but actually he's capturing what everyone thinks in 1945. So that's an A-star idea for you. The other interesting thing is this book. This represented nuclear war. Nuclear war is about the destruction of all mankind. Your generation's very lucky. You've probably never thought what would happen in a nuclear war. My generation, we grew up believing it could happen at any time. Yeah, because it had been done. It's only a recent idea that actually we're probably safe from nuclear war. No country's going to start bombing another. When Priestley was writing, that was the number one thought. If we have another war, it will kill everyone. And that's partly what his play is about. Band 6. I've got to talk about the context. Now this is a bit unfair of the examiners because in the question it will never ask you about the context. Yeah? So if you want an A-star, you have to put this in without being asked to do it. And that's where my 1912, 1914, 1945 nuclear war, that's the context. Yeah, and if you put that in, you'll get the A-star. What do you have to do to make sure of the A-star? We did that in the A. We also wrote about Priestley in the A. I've told you about the context. You've written a lot about a little. The new bit is evaluation. Evaluation's very easy. Joe, would you mind communicating with me? Will you go then? Yeah? Evaluation, it looks like this. On the one hand, Priestley might be suggesting that the upper classes need to be wiped out. They're all like the Burlings and the Crofts. However, he may be suggesting that the upper classes can be educated and changed, as he tries to change Eric and Sheila. That's my B grade. Evaluation says, on balance, I believe this one to be true, or I believe that one to be true, and this is why. And when you do that, when you say which one you think is best, you evaluate, you get your A-star. Yeah, this doesn't say they evaluate well or badly. It just says if they evaluate, we have to consider the A-star grade. That's wonderful to know, isn't it? At the end of your essay, evaluate. That part of your essay has to be A-star. Yeah, even if the rest of your essay is C grade. It won't be, because to evaluate you'll have to have compared, so it'll be at least a B. To do this, always write about the ending. Remember I said the ending is where the writer puts their ideas. The ending is easy to find. It's always in the same place. You won't get stressed in the exam. It's always there. What does that look like? Well, I'm going to read this out to you. This is an easy way to get an A star, and you can steal it if you wish. I suggest if you're writing, that you write down maybe 6 words that sum this up, or 10 words that sum it up. So, the second death carries with it Priestley's political point that the lessons of World War I, represented by the death of Eva, were not learned, so that the Burlings now face, in the final words of the play, questions. Priestley's question in 1945 is how the ruling classes allowed World War II to occur, so that millions and millions of John Smiths and Eva Smiths lost their lives again. Eric and Sheila therefore represent the younger generation who grew up, as I showed you, in the interwar years and failed to live up to their responsibility. Priestley's play reflected the mood of the country. I told you about the election, who ousted Winston Churchill and his Conservative government that had taken them to war, replacing them with the Socialist Labour government. It's not Sheila and Eric, but their children who have learned the inspector's lesson. Steal that. It's an A star. You can use it if you're writing about the Burlings, because you're just going to say they didn't learn the lesson. You can use it if you're writing about Sheila and Eric, because you'll say they did learn the lesson. And obviously, you can use it if you're writing anything about Priestley. Yeah, so that can be stolen, put in your exam, whatever the question, virtually. Dramatic irony. Do you remember I said that was an easy way to get an A? Well, here's an obvious one. Here we are back in 1912. There's a lot of wild talk about possible labour trouble in the future. We employers at last are coming together to see that the interests of capital are properly protected. Well, when the audience are listening to that in 1945, they know that in 1926 the whole country went on strike. They know that in the 1930s millions of people lost their jobs and there were strikes everywhere. So they know that Burling is ridiculous at this point. That's dramatic irony. The audience know something, but the characters don't. Why does Priestley do that? Because he wants to discredit the Burlings. He wants to show everyone that the Burlings are idiots, because the Burlings represent the ruling classes, and the ruling classes are idiots. And then there's this thing to think about: who benefits? Who benefits from the First World War? It happens in 1914. Who benefits? The people who make the weapons. Yeah, the factory owners who stop producing things that we'd use in the home and make millions more out of producing guns or uniforms or bullets or bombs or the new aeroplane or the new tank. Yeah, who profits from 6 million dead soldiers? Burlings and the Crofts. Yeah, it's people's blood that makes them rich. And that's why they don't learn the inspector's lesson. Here's another bit of dramatic irony. People say that war's inevitable, and to that I say fiddlesticks. Everything to lose and nothing to gain. Look at the language that he uses. Profit. Yeah, and I've just shown you how Burling makes profit out of the war. And that's why it happens. The ruling classes make money out of it. And then there's that obvious bit of irony. Here we are in 1912, saying the Titanic absolutely unsinkable. But actually, 1 month later, April 1912, the Titanic sinks. What does the Titanic represent? Well, partly it represents the stupidity of the ruling classes, but also it represents the ruling classes themselves. Yeah, they were sunk in 1945 when the country rejected them, when Priestley is saying we've got to change that lot or get rid of them. And so the Titanic is a metaphor for those ruling classes. A man has to mind his own business. Who says that? Burling says it. And the very moment that he says we've all got to look after ourselves and each other, that very moment the doorbell rings and the inspector comes in. Yeah, if the inspector is supernatural, those words have acted like a summons. They've brought the inspector there. I'm going to show you it's not every man for himself. I'm going to show you it's not looking after your family. I'm going to show you we all need to look after each other. Those are the words that summon the inspector. They bring him. Dramatic irony. We come to realise that during the play. The characters don't. Maybe you could argue Sheila does. Because when she hears these words later in the play, she says, oh, is that when he arrived? She twigs. The other characters don't. The examiner's advice for getting an A and A star. I told you that. Write a lot about a little. It's such a simple little thing, and you might think I've just made it up, but I haven't. Every time your teachers go and meet someone from AQA, those are the words they keep saying. Get your pupils to write a lot about a little. And I've tried to model that for you in lots of different ways today. I'm hoping lots of you will feel, actually that's not that hard, I can do that. That's an A grade skill and an A star skill. They often think about possible alternative interpretations. Remember, that worked at a B. And I'll say it again, if you're writing at a B, you're already halfway to an A star. You've already done loads of the skills that are in the A star. I said I'd talk to you about the 7 deadly sins. Another A and A star idea. So each character represents a sin. Plays first started in church as morality plays. And the idea was you watched the play and you learnt to be a better human being. And to do that, they had the usual villains. And so people would take on the role of these sins. Pride, an excessive belief in your abilities. It's been called the sin from which all others arise. Vanity, that's Sybil. Do you notice I didn't give you Sybil Burling as one of the characters with 2 views on? And there was a reason for that. It's very hard to find a good thing to say about her. Yeah? If you get a question on Sybil Burling, do the other question. You get higher marks more quickly. Envy. Well, that's obviously jealousy in Sheila. Lust. That's Eric. Much more than it is Gerald. He's the one who forces himself on her. And greed. The desire for wealth. Avarice. That's Arthur Burling. And so you can easily write about how this is a play with a Christian message, and he uses this Christian language of the 7 deadly sins to expose what the rich are like. If that makes sense to you, use it, you'll get at least an A. Okay, you will get at least an A doing that. So, there they are. I've left Gerald out of this. Gerald has come up recently. Okay? So I would revise Gerald least out of all of the Burlings. Remember, the examiner said don't write about all the characters. Pick 1 or 2. My advice is 2, if you can. Always write about Priestley's ideas. This is the First World War. Yeah, it doesn't happen in the play, but the play set in 1912 is about why that happens. And I've chosen a photograph for you that works for me. That's the Second World War. And it works for me because it reminds me that these 2 wars are actually similar. They've got the same causes. Visually it works for me because the trees become the buildings. Very similar image for me, even though it's 2 completely separate wars. It's a visual reminder to me about what the play's about. Finally, Ethan, if I want to talk about Priestley's views, it often helps me picture the inspector. So is the inspector a sort of shadowy figure at the back. Yeah, a ghoulish, ghost-like presence. In this version of the play, he's coming to attack people in 1912. Now, I'm encouraging you to reject that. He's not just writing about 1912. Yeah, he's writing about now. Now for him is 1945. So I'm not happy with that as a way for me to revise. I'm much happier with this one. This is the inspector, and he's come to inspect the family. Who is he inspecting them for? He wants to change the world for the millions of Eva Smiths and the millions of John Smiths. And there they are represented there. Priestley wants to change the future. He's not just writing a play that people will come to and enjoy. If you think about it, in 1945, the people who are going to see that play are the better off. And he's writing the play for them. Yet in his audience, there will be quite a few Sheilas and Erics and Burlings. And he's showing the audience, this is what you look like. This is what you're like. I want to change you, and this is why. Yeah,